just chill, they never say no to me. Always say that they will do whatever I want them to, when I confront them to. Watch where you're walking, or you just might bump into. I never rule them, I only school them. But if they ever try to fool me, that's when I fool them.
Pre-exhaust is a training technique that has been around for a very, very long time, at least since the 1960s. It involves doing a simple exercise, or a isolation exercise as most people call it, immediately followed by a compound exercise that targets the same muscle group. And there's multiple reasons why someone might do this. Two of them actually make sense, and pre-exhaust can be useful in those situations, but one of them is just based on a bunch of false assumptions. And today I'm going to explain the reasoning behind these different reasons to do pre-exhaust, so we can all understand in which situations pre-exhaust can be useful and in which ones it's not. The first reason, and the reason why people actually started doing pre-exhaust originally, was that people believed that one of the muscles involved in a compound movement would be weaker than the others and therefore give out first in the exercise, and therefore limit how effectively you could work some of the other stronger muscles in that compound exercise. For example, some people believe that your arms were a weak link in compound pushing and pulling exercises, and so basically they thought that you needed to do pre-exhaust in order to work around weak links in certain compound movements. Now, there are two reasons why this is wrong, and the first one being the assumption that certain muscles even are weak links. In case of the upper body, there have been studies done with medical imaging technology that compared the relative volume of different muscle groups in the upper body, and of course they were looking at the averages. And it turns out that the arms aren't really smaller muscle groups. As a matter of fact, it turns out that your triceps is the second largest muscle in your upper body, and the largest muscle in your upper body is actually your deltoids, your shoulders. And just the combined muscle mass of your arm flexors, the biceps and the other arm flexors, is actually greater than the combined muscle mass of your lats. Muscles like the chest and the lats might look big because they are spread out, they're stretched out across your torso, but we usually don't have a very good idea of the depth of these muscles, of how thick they are, and so they might look like they are some of the biggest muscles in the upper body, but in reality they're really not. The second reason why this is wrong is because it's not just about the size of the muscles, it's also about the muscles' leverage. When we are doing a compound exercise, we can change the relative positioning of the upper arms, the forearms, and the lower body relative to the line of resistance. And this has an effect on how demanding the exercise is for the different muscle groups involved. For example, if you're doing a bench press, if you take a narrower grip, you increase the lever against your triceps, but if you take a wider grip, you decrease the lever against your triceps, but you increase it against the chest. And somewhere in between that is where you're going to find a good balance. And there's a similar situation with pulling movements. Most people, when they are doing something like a row, have the forearms roughly in line with the line of resistance. This is going to give a pretty good balance of demand for the arms and the back. But if you pull in a way which puts more demand on the arms, so if you're pulling something more like this, where you still have that, shoulder extension, but you're pulling more like this, you can see what I'm doing, then that's going to put more demand on the arm flexors. And so by altering your positioning and the way you perform the compound exercise, you can put more demand on one muscle group relative to another. And most compound movements will have a way of positioning and movement that provides a good balance of demand for all of the different muscle groups involved or targeted, so that all of them are being worked equally as hard. By the way, the reason I corrected myself there is because targeted and involved aren't the same thing. A muscle group can be involved, but that doesn't mean that it's effectively worked. Your glutes and your hamstrings are involved in a standing barbell biceps curl, because if they weren't, you would fall over, because they need to stabilize and keep you upright. But they are not effectively worked because no one says, okay, I'm going to go do a set of bicep curls for my glutes and my hamstrings. But anyways, also consider that if you have a muscle that is weaker than another in a compound movement, then that muscle is going to have to work harder than the others, and so it's going to receive the greater muscle growth stimulus, and therefore over time it's going to even out, as long as you are performing the exercise in a way which provides a good balance of demand for all of the different muscle groups targeted, of course. By the way guys, if you're enjoying this video so far and if you feel like you are learning something, then please don't forget to leave at least a like on this video. I really appreciate it, and it really supports the channel. There's also this belief that you are working the pre-exhausted muscle harder when you're doing pre-exhaust, but you're not really working the muscle harder, you're just working it more. See, if you do for example a set of chest flies to failure and then a chest press to failure right after that, then it's basically just like doing another set of the chest fly. Because if you do the chest fly correctly to momentary muscular failure, then you will have recruited and stimulated all of the available muscle fibers in the chest, and you will have worked that muscle as hard as you possibly can. If you then do a chest press after that, then like I said, it's basically just like doing another set of the chest fly. You're not working it any harder, you're just working it again. And I say this very often, and I want to throw it in this video as well. Go check out my video on why I only do one set to failure. It's called Why I Only Do One Set to Failure, where I explain why you only need to do one properly performed set to failure. That's the difference. One properly performed set to failure. And I also have another video which I mentioned in that video where I talk about how to perform a set properly to failure. So go check that out if that sounds interesting. But anyways, what we just discussed was of course one of the false reasons to use pre-exhaust and one of the situations where it's not useful. But like I said earlier, there are two other situations where pre-exhaust actually can be useful. So what are they? The first one is if you or if someone you are training is older, or they're very frail, or maybe they have some injury that you are concerned with, and therefore you don't want to load them with as much weight in a compound exercise. For example, maybe you're training someone who have some knee, hip and or ankle issues, and they are aggravated by performing a leg press. By pre-exhausting some of the muscles that are involved in the leg press with, for example, hip abduction and adduction, you can lower the amount of weight that the person can use in the leg press, and therefore having less force going through the joints, and therefore having a lower chance of, aggravating some of those joint issues. The other situation where it can be useful, which is going to be a little bit more rare, is if you have someone who is just, ridiculously strong and you don't have enough weight to be able to perform a particular compound exercise. And so then you utilize pre-exhaust so they are able to perform that compound exercise and achieve, momentary muscle failure within a reasonable time frame, so they're not sitting there doing the exercise for like 5 minutes straight. By the way, when it comes to like optimal time on the load, 60 to 90 seconds seem to be a good starting point for most people, but some people do better with a little bit more, some people do better with a little bit less. That's just stuff you're gonna have to experiment with. But for average, on average 60 to 90 seconds seems to be a good starting point for most people when it comes to time on the load. But anyways guys, that was all for this video. I really hope you liked it. If you find this video useful in any way, and if you learned anything, then please don't forget to leave a like on this video. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, also don't forget to click that subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can be notified the next time I upload. But with that being said, I see you boys in the next video next time. Peace.